Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to Dr. Umar and all our distinguished guests here. And I'm not going to introduce Dr. Umar because all of you have come because you know who Dr. Umar is. But I wasn't expecting to be able to come today, but I was reminded of a beautiful poem by Sidi Abu Madian al-Ghawth radiyallahu ta'ala, who said, تحيا بكم كل أرض تنزلون بها كأنكم في بقاع الأرض أمطار وتشتهي العين منكم منظرا حسنا كأنكم في عيون الناس أزهار ونوركم يهتدي الساري لرؤيته كأنكم في ظلام الليل أقمار لا أوحش الله ربعا من زيارتكم يا من لهم في الحشا والقلب تذكار. That every land you enter is given life through you, as if in all corners of the earth you are life-giving rain, and the eye longs for a good glance towards you, as if in the eyes of people you are like beautiful flowers, and through your light the one traveling is guided, as if in the dark of night you are full moons. May Allah not deprive any land from your visit, O you who have in our hearts and lives much fond memories. That's a very rough translation, and Dr. Umar is a very scrupulous translator, so I feel very ashamed.
In any case, this is about the great awliya. It's not about, I'm a very rough translation as well, so don't be confused and don't be deceived. Alhamdulillah.
So it's a tremendous honor to have Dr. Umar here. Dr. Umar was one of the people who encouraged us to start a hub here in Toronto, and he is the one who asked Habib Umar for a name for this project, and Habib Umar suggested that we give it the descriptive title of As-Siraj al-Munir, and that's why we have that name. That's through Dr. Umar, and Dr. Umar came to the opening of the first hub, alhamdulillah, and he's stayed here a number of times. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect and preserve him. And inshallah, we are in the process of moving to the new hub, but after the lesson, inshallah, Dr. Umar has agreed to perform the first congregational prayer at the new hub. We're still not moved in there, and I know some people's blood pressure might go up because we don't have permission to conduct programs there, but prayer is not a program, so we're going to do Isha there. I'm not looking towards the Umar, but inshallah, so this is, alhamdulillah, and he's been a source of so much grace in the lives of so many of those present. Barakallahu ta'ala fikum. So without further delay, I'll just hand over to Dr. Umar.
Did you want me to talk about a particular topic? They told me that you wanted to talk about revival. Bismillah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء مرضات الله ووجهه وقربه وثوابه. اللهم افتح علينا بحكمتك وانشر علينا برحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. يا عليم علمنا من علمك ما ترضى به عنا ولا تؤاخذنا بما تعلمه منا. يا حليم خلقنا بخلق الحلم وحققنا بحقائق العلم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. I was given the suggestion that I speak about revival in Islamic history and some of the great revivalists. And I think one of the things that might be good to emphasize before speaking about that is that although revival is a very distinct part of our ummah, and we have people who renew the religion, and that is to revive it from century to century, as is clear in hadith. Today, it may be that we have a particular concern with this that could be somewhat ahistorical. And let me try to make sense of that statement. Many Muslims believe today that our history is pretty much of a failure, that we begin really well, and the Prophet ﷺ and his companions are remarkable beyond words, and the successors, but then, especially from the time of the Umayyads, it's just sort of like downhill. And of course we have extremist ideologies that are extremely problematic. And it is obligatory for scholars to repudiate them. But these extremist ideologies, they often present very explicitly this vision of history, that really there's not much there of worth. We will even see that some of the extremists who are widely read in our time and over the last decades reject the fiqh productions of our great imams and their traditions as fiqh al-awraq, the fiqh of book pages, bookish scholars living maybe in ivory towers and writing things that probably have no relevance. And they would say instead you've got to have fiqh al-harakat al-waqi' al-haraki. You have to have the fiqh of the movement reality. So these are extremely destructive, alien ideologies that have harmed us beyond words. And today, when we see these horrible things happening, such as the terrorist deeds in California or Tennessee or the Boston Marathon or the Paris murders, the Paris slaughters, or what happened in London, and so many other things that you can talk about, it's like, where did this come from? This is a very hateful ideology that is showing its head. And when it does show its head with the kind of brutality that we see in case, and absolute insanity, then we are shocked by it, and we can identify certain groups, and we can say, they looked at this website or they did that. But we have to understand that really that we have ideology, that these extremist ideologies, most of them among Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they have a genealogy that brings them all together. And some of them may be more extreme than others. But they have much in common, many fundamental fallacies and misconceptions. But in any case, those people in particular, they have essentially written off Islamic history as a failure until the time that they appear. And now they're going to do it the way it never was done. So what we have to understand is that our history is rich and beautiful, and it took on so many different colors, so many different textures. There's not such a thing as an Islamic civilization. There are Islamic civilizations, plural, in India, in China, in Central Asia, in Europe, in the Ottoman Empire, in East and West Africa, in Spain and Portugal, in Sicily, even in Switzerland, where Muslims were there for 150 years, which is an extremely important part of historical development in the West. So a lot of times I think it's very important, if we're going to talk about revival today, to put it in the context that we live in unique times, in that Islam today is really in desperate condition. And we should say again, Muslims are. But don't imagine that what has become a very unfortunate reality for us is something that extends all the way back for centuries and centuries. When I was in our RIS in the retreat just these last days, I had the blessing to be able to pray Fajr with our brothers and sisters there. And then usually they would ask me questions afterwards. And one man, who, God bless him, he's just so affected by these ideologies. And so he just asked me the question that when Islam spread, these are not his words, but basically that, did they really believe in Tawheed? I mean, why did they come into Islam? Was it because of the wealth? Was it because of, career? I mean, he was trying to find, it's like, these people, and I didn't really know how to answer him. It's like, I've got to be able somehow to try to get through your veil. He's got so many misconceptions that I'm not sure that I know where to begin. And I don't want to insult him in front of the people. But the thing is that in Islamic history, we do have tests all the time. This ummah is the best community brought forth for mankind, with the best prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, given to mankind. And therefore, we will be the most tested of all ummahs. The children of Israel were tested with tests that were extremely severe. The Christians were tested with tests that were extremely severe, and you might even say that they really didn't make it out of that test, that after that they never got their balance back. So you think that we will go through history like a cakewalk? No, that's not going to happen, because on the day of judgment we will see who was the most sincere, who was the most remarkable, who was the greatest. And I believe that our ummah will just dazzle the believers of all time by not just what we did in the beginning, which was spectacular, but also by what you will see at the end. And the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ummati ummatun marhuma. My ummah is an ummah that is shown mercy. And you can also understand from this that there will come times, especially towards the end, but at other times as well, when if this ummah were not shown mercy, then it wouldn't make it. But it will be shown mercy, and it will get itself back together again. So the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Ummati kal matar la yudra awwaluhu khayrun am akhiruhu." My ummah is like a rainfall, a good rain. It's not known whether the beginning of that rain, which would be the Sahaba and the successors, is better and more beneficial, or the last of that rain, which may be people like yourselves. And, there's the beautiful hadith in which the Prophet said, "I miss my brothers. If only I could see my brothers. Ishtaqtu ila ikhwani." And the Sahaba said, "Well, we are your brothers." And the Prophet ﷺ said, "No, you are my companions. And my brothers are those who will not see me. And any of them would give everything that he's got to be able to see me." And then he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that these will have the rewards of 70 of you. And one of the Sahabis said, 70 of them? And that's not because he doubts the Prophet, but like, maybe I didn't hear this right. Did you actually say 70 of us? Or did I not hear it right and you said 70 of them? It's not as if I don't believe. He's not questioning the Prophet. But the Prophet said, "No, 70 of you." And they say, "Lima ya Rasulullah?" Why, O Messenger of God? And he said, "Because you found helpers to help you do the good you did. They won't find helpers." And yet, you understand from this hadith, at least I do, that they will do something so remarkably worthy of the Messenger of God, that they will be that last blessed part of the rain, and they will get huge rewards. And I believe, when I look at the world today, in the light of the little that I see and understand, that this is going to happen. And maybe it doesn't happen in our lifetimes or those of our children or our grandchildren, maybe over the next 200 years, maybe more. But I do believe this ummah is going to come back to life in its splendor and beauty. And Islamic civilizations were always among the most spectacularly beautiful that the world ever saw. And we talked about beauty, the splendor of truth, in the retreat. I did. And it's very important, that, in Islam, art, and here we don't mean art just like fine arts, but we mean art such as the production of beauty and all that you do. Art was an essential part of the Sharia. The Sharia cannot be complete without a beautiful civilization that houses it. That's always what it does produce. When the Sharia is Sharia, and it's got to produce that. And also Islamic civilizations perform this miracle of joining art and science, the production of beauty with also the production of incredible sciences. So, and this is the Islam that no one seems to know anymore. Because what has happened to us, has reduced us to misery. And there are not many in the Muslim world, I believe, who even imagine what was there before. So when we talk about revival, let's not think that our history was a disaster. And not that that would necessarily imply such a thing. But be careful not to fall into the cognitive frames that have been set for you as traps. Islamic civilization is incredibly successful. And especially for the first 1,200 years, we have troubles, yes. We have destruction, yes. But basically we can always come back. And we do, and nevertheless, and we spread so far in the world that there are always havens where things are happening that are amazing. And to me, the great watermark in Islamic history comes around, let's say, I would say 1799. That's my arbitrary date. But you could say 1800, but I said, let's make it 1799. Maybe you want to make it 1798. 1798 is the year that Napoleon invades Egypt and Syria. And that is the beginning of the disaster of colonialism. Not really the beginning, because the British and the Dutch and others had been active before that, but this is something that is a little bit different, significantly different. And it's said that Napoleon, during the 3 years that he was in Egypt, he came in 1798 and he leaves in 1801. The British will force him out. Unfortunately, the Muslims couldn't do that. The Mamluks would charge him, and the Mamluks were incredibly brave and incredibly honorable soldiers, men of war. But, they charge on horseback, they have arrows, they have swords, they have spears, they also have gunpowder, and the French would mow them down by the hundreds. And it's said that Napoleon cried. It said that he said, "You'll never see the likes of these on earth again." Because he knew these are great men. And this is the way a soldier should be. But unfortunately, we live in an age now of these weapons of mass dissemination, mass destruction. Napoleon is one of the people who unleashed that on Europe, by the way. Napoleon takes over. One of the Egyptian historians has a reference in which he says that Al-Jabarti, in which he said, I believe it's Al-Jabarti, who's a great Egyptian historian, and he says that Napoleon killed a scholar for every day he was there. And he doesn't say much about it, but there is an Egyptian historian, a woman, who actually researched that, and she wrote a book on it in Arabic. And she said that did, in fact, that's pretty much what happened. That during those years, on the average, you could say a great scholar was killed, executed, maybe shot every day. So this is the beginning of a huge assault on what we had. We don't know much, we've forgotten what Islamic cities were like. Islamic cities were garden cities. They were very beautiful. One of the first principles of Islamic city is that you've got to be able to provide your people with all the clean water they need. One. If you can't do that, you can't make a city here. You could have a farm, you could have a village. You can't have a city. And the city must be able to provide its people with all the food they need. Doesn't mean that you can give them rice and potatoes and wheat, but you've got to give them at least wheat or rice or something else. They must have enough food to live. And if you can't do that, then you need to look someplace else. Cities like Damascus, like Cairo, Fez, Granada, Seville, and you could name any, Lahore, Karachi, Delhi, Hyderabad, all of these cities provided their people with all the food they needed and all the water. Now, of course, that's going to affect trade. So what it means is that trade which will flourish will be trade in goods that are qualitatively better. So actually you're going to have a rich market, but we will not rely on our import market to survive. You can't do that. Islamic cities were very beautiful, we have rules that govern the width of the streets, the different kind of streets, the houses. For example, you're not allowed to ornament the outside of your house. You weren't allowed to do that. And who runs the city? The prince? No, the judge. The judges ruled the Muslim cities. And the pictures that we have from the reports about that are that they were highly respected and very well trained, not just in book knowledge, but in the actual practice of the judiciary in their cities. And so if you ornamented the outside of your wall, then the muhtasib or someone else, the magistrate, they will report you to the judge, and you will have to come and see him, and he will make you remove that ornamentation. And if you don't, he'll remove it himself. He'll have men do it. Okay, now inside your house, you can ornament it as much as you want. And there are many wisdoms in that. Lots of wisdoms in that. Some of them would even pertain to, protecting the city from theft and, from other things. But also it enabled poor and rich to live side by side. And then what if your jasmine grows over the wall? Is that ornamentation? And the judge, at least in cases that I know about, he would say that no, you can leave the jasmine because it sweetens the street. And we want our streets to smell good. The streets in the city had to smell good, and they had to be protected from smoke pollution, from the bakery or, from anything else that is using wood and fire, and from houses. And they also had to be protected as much as possible from noise pollution, which often would be in that time from animals. So you might have to build a second wall on your stable so that we don't hear your mule or your donkey braying, or at least we don't hear it so harshly. So these cities were really amazing. And, this was the tradition that we had, these great cities. Cities like Tarim, for example, boasted that they only needed to import 3 things. And of course they had incredible markets, and they were incredible merchants, but they must import needles and razors and coffee. And of course they could have lived without all of those things, but they can't produce that. So, and they're importing all kinds of things. They are extremely good at trade, wealthy in fact. They're big merchants. But the city has got to be able to take care of itself. And our cities were filled with animals. And animals have rights in Islam. Allah, God has rights, huququllah. And human beings have right, huquq al-ibad. And animals have right, huquq al-baha'im wal-hayawanat. The rights of livestock and animals. You have to feed animals the kind of food they were created to eat. You cannot torture them. You cannot abuse them. And there's all sorts of regulations about them. And we would have awqaf, we would have endowments for old donkeys, old mules, old horses, so they can go maybe by the side of the river. This happened a lot of times in many cities, Damascus being an example. And they can graze, and they can drink the water, and they can just lie down in the sun. And they do that until God takes their souls. This world is the garden of the animals. It's not your garden. And woe be to you if you make it the hell of the animals. This is one of the things that will be likely, I believe, to arouse the wrath of God. You've got to treat chickens correctly. Don't pack them together and cut off their beaks. Don't let them see the sunlight to mass produce meat. Feed cattle things they were never created to eat. They get ulcers in their stomachs. I've seen it. You know, that you've got to pack them with antibiotics because their conditions are so filthy. You know, that is one of the things that triggers the wrath of God. And we were good to animals. And we believed that without animals you cannot be human. You cannot be fully human. And dogs were one of the animals that we loved. And every Muslim city that I know about had special breeds of dogs in the street. They were street dogs who are taken care of and trained, and you have keepers of them. But they live in the streets. The people will feed them, but they mostly eat garbage. The garbage is going to be organic. They will also police the streets from thieves because they know that you live in this house, but we've never seen him before. Why is he coming at 2 a.m.? Okay, they also are trained to see fires. That like this smoke is not coming out of the window, there must be a fire. And they will sound the fire alarm. And they also protect from rats and vermin. And in most Muslim cities, the people love these dogs. Shafi'is have some of the greatest restrictions on dogs of all the schools because of issues of ritual purity. And Malikis do too, but not as many. But the Shafi'is write perhaps more books about the greatness of dogs and how we cannot live without dogs than anybody else. You know, so these dogs were beloved to us. And Istanbul was famous for its dogs. Once the dogs of Istanbul began to overpopulate, and this was in one of the modern centuries, 18th, 19th. Certain Frenchmen approached the Sultan, and they said that, could we buy from you just a large number of these dogs? You know, because you have a problem with them, you need to get rid of them. And the Sultan said, and what would you do with them? And they say, we'll make purses. And he said, no, the dogs weren't created for that. And then he took the dogs and he, to my knowledge, put them on an island where they're not going to bother people, but where they can live. Okay, that was in Islam. Can you imagine that today? I mean, you know, can you imagine that today? When the French come into Cairo in 1798, one of the first things Napoleon does, and I don't know why, they kill off all the dogs, which is a huge crime. It's a huge crime. And of course it breaks the hearts of the Muslims as well. Like, these are our dogs, you know. We hear them yelping and screaming as you shoot them down. You know, there's a special breed of dog. Trained dogs. These are good dogs. Maybe because the dogs didn't like the French. I don't know. Because that's another thing. These dogs can help defend your city. So, 1799 is the date that I like because that is the date of the martyrdom of Tipu Sultan. And Tipu Sultan, in my belief, is one of the last great classical rulers of Islam. And there is Sultan Abdul Hamid, there is Sultan Abdul Majid, there are others as well. But Tipu Sultan, to me, is special. And then 1799 to me is also a special date. And I believe then the 1800s, the 1900s, this is the test. And this is the test where the main part of that test, as I see it, is everything that pertains to colonialism, imperialism, modernism, secularism, scientism, and the rise of a whole civilization of banking and finance and so forth that will shake us to the core and basically leave no rock unturned to try to destroy us and to remove everything that we had. You have so many beautiful Muslims in the world today. And we pray very much the way the Prophet prayed, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, outwardly. And we fast very much the way that the Blessed Prophet fasted, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But we may have the mind of an engineer. And engineering is also one of the great disciplines. Okay? But not if your mind is a spiritual vacuum. And many engineers are that way because they know nothing about the structure of the world. They know nothing. They're not taught that. And often they have very mechanical ideas about, problems are quantitative and we can solve any problem. Yeah, in architecture and engineering, maybe, maybe not. Or they have the mind of a physician. But a modern physician who knows nothing about the structure of reality and knows nothing about the way God created the world. Okay, so this is a disaster that we face. When we talk about these extremists, and really you've got to learn about this. You've got to become aware about the nature of this danger. They're modernists to the core. Modernism, and we talked about this in the retreat, maybe you could, if you didn't look at that, maybe you could look at it. There's a lot to be said that wasn't said. We only have a few minutes. But modernism, is always winners and losers. It's just the present moment, moving on to the future, being forward-looking, futuristic, that's what counts. The present is only a means to the future that we never get to. And the past really is irrelevant. And there's virtually nothing in modernism that will regard the past to be anything more than an interesting relic suitable for a museum or maybe a national park or a historical site to be preserved for future generations. But continuity, no. Even if you say you're a conservative, which would seem to imply that you're trying to conserve principles and traditions, but that's not usually what they're doing. And so anti-tradition is one of the most common things that comes with modernism. And when we look at our extremists, and maybe we shouldn't say our, but the extremists who call themselves Muslims, and I'm not saying that they're not, although some of the things they do put them out. But when we look at them, some of the things that some of them do, like ISIS, for example, this is not Islam. This is not Islam at all. The Prophet even described them to us very carefully. Talked about their hair, how they would wear it, that they would have kunyas like Abu Bakr, they would have nisbas like Baghdadi to places and villages, and they will be ashab al-dawla. They were people who claim to have a state, and they're dogs of hell. They are sharrul khalqi wal khaliqa, the worst of all created beings, the worst of all human beings and animals. So don't be deceived by this, And he said other things that I'm not here to talk about. Okay, but, it's very important for us to begin to get the tradition back, and that means to get the whole tradition back with beauty, with an understanding of the metaphysics of reality and sound theology and who we were for over 1,200 years. So anti-traditionalism is a big part of these last 200 years. And when you look at a lot of the extremists, again, they have absolutely no interest in what you and I might call the tradition. As I said before, one of the most famous of these talks about fuqaha al-awraq. The fuqaha of the book pages. And that we need a new fiqh. They will say, in the days of the Sahaba they had fiqh because they had haraka. They have movement. Again, modernist ideological term. So the last 200 years have been one of the most difficult in human history. For us and actually for the whole world. I mean, don't you see what's happening to the polar ice cap? Don't you know that an atom bomb was exploded in 1945 too? That's not a good sign. Don't you see the rates of suicide and other things that we have? The world is in a very precarious situation. Okay, and will Islam be able to survive this period? And my belief is absolutely yes. But not until people like yourselves and like your teachers, Sheikh Faraz and others, who are linked to the tradition, are able to bring it back. Okay, and so that we understand it, we realize it, we know how to apply it. And we're sane, we're not insane, we're not at war with the world. So today, the issue of revival is more critical than it's ever perhaps ever been. But after that, let's go back and look at two revivers who come together in tandem in history. And those are Imam al-Ghazali and Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. Both of these great men are Persians. They come from Sunni Persia. Persia in those days was overwhelmingly Sunni. It was a Sunni bastion. And it produced so many great people in Islam. So many. It was one of the great blessings of Islam. Imam al-Ghazali is about 19 years or so older than Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. And Imam al-Ghazali is one of the greatest minds, one of the greatest human beings who ever appeared in history. And you know his story, how he will then go from one school to another. I mean, he studied so hard as a youth and as a young man that he pushed himself to the brink. And then, when his brilliance is seen, finally he will be appointed to An-Nizamiyya, the great Seljuk school in Baghdad, which is one of those incredible accomplishments of Islam that will help to generate the university and the college in the Western world. And Imam al-Ghazali teaches there, as you know, and he was the most brilliant teacher. And then he can't teach anymore. He can't teach anymore. He can't even get out a sentence. And it's very clear to him that, this is a sign from God, and you need to leave this work, and you need to go find your Lord and purify your heart and get yourself right and protect yourself from the fire and from hypocrisy and from seeing the self and being proud of your actions. Although I know that Imam al-Ghazali, even at that time, before he left, if we were to compare ourselves to him, we are the ones who are in desperate need, not him. But the standards of that time are different standards. It's a different age, a different civilization, a different people. And as you know, then Imam al-Ghazali will leave Baghdad. And he then goes on his spiritual journey. And he gets the gift of absolute truthfulness and sidq and the wusul that he needed, so that now I am nothing but God's servant. Interestingly, when Imam al-Ghazali leaves Baghdad, a 17-year-old youth from Persia, from Gilan, or Gailan, or Gilan, I think they say, he comes into Baghdad. And that's Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, but he's not a sheikh yet. He's 17 years old. And he has been sent by his mother, whose name is Fatima, Ammatul Jabbar, Ummul Khair, who's really his sheikha because his father passed away and he was an orphan. He was raised an orphan, so he doesn't have the blessing of seeing his father. And he's raised by his aunt, Aisha, and by his mother, his paternal aunt, Aisha, and his mother, Fatima, beautiful woman, wali of Allah. And at the age of 17, she tells Sheikh Abdul Qadir that he will go to Baghdad. And she says to him that, these eyes will not see this beautiful face again in this world. And he can't come home, even though he did not like Baghdad. He didn't like it at all. It was a city of sin and iniquity and robbers and bandits and, all kinds of things. Al-Qadi Abdul Wahab al-Maliki, who is also from Baghdad, he said, Baghdadu darun li ahli al-mali, Baghdadu darun, maybe li ahli al-mali, I don't remember, tayyibatun, walil mafalisi daru danki wa diqi. Baghdad is a beautiful city for people of wealth, but for the people who are bankrupt, they don't have anything, it is a place of great difficulty and difficult straits. ظللت حيران أمشي في أزقتها كأني مصحف في بيت زنديقي. I kept walking through its street in a state of bewilderment, as if I were a mushaf in a heretic's house. And they said in the days of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani, they had another poem, because there was so many problems in Baghdad, starvation too, because nothing's working. They said that if Qarun, who had all the wealth, said if he came to Baghdad, it would be legally permissible for him to take sadaqah. So the situation was really bad. And so what age are we talking about? We're talking about the age of the Crusades. This is the age of the Crusades, the first Crusades. And when Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani is, let's say, around 10 years old, the city of Toledo will fall in Spain, which is one of the major disasters. And this is the same crusade movement. And then by the time that he's 16, the Crusaders will have destroyed Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, what is today Jordan, parts of Iraq, and elsewhere. And they were really brutal. And not only were they brutal to Muslims, but they were brutal to Christians as well. Because there are a lot of Christians there. But if you're not of their denomination, if you're not following the Pope of Rome, then you won't be treated any different from a Jew or a Muslim. And Jews, they are merciless with them. And they're very powerful, they're very brutal, and there's just chaos everywhere. There are powerful princes here and there, but they don't work together. They are rivals of each other. There are all kinds of problems. Robbers, famine. It's really a mess. And Sheikh Abdul Qadir would say later, because he comes as a young man, and he would say later that, the walls of Islam are falling down. Is there anyone who will help me to try to put the wall back up? So he comes to Baghdad, and then from the age of 17, for about the next 40 years, more or less, he will do nothing but study and discipline himself. And he becomes one of the greatest scholars of the outward law, mastering the Quran, mastering hadith, mastering usul al-fiqh, mastering the different qira'at, the Arabic language, all of the things associated with that. And he masters the Hanbali school. And that's because the Hanbali school was one of the schools in Gilan, where he comes from in Persia. So he probably was a Hanbali anyway. And then also the Shafi'i school. Perhaps because in that area, although I don't know this to be the case, the Shafi'i school might have also been one of the dominant ones. In Persia, the dominant schools were Shafi'i and Hanafi. And so he becomes a mufti in the Shafi'i school. He becomes a mufti in the Hanbali school. He becomes a great teacher. The fuqaha of his time were amazed at the excellence of his fatwas and the speed with which he gave them. So it takes him almost 40 years to do that. Of course, in Jilan, as you know, he would have memorized the Quran. He would have learned other things. He would have been given Arabic. He doesn't come to Baghdad without knowledge, but in Baghdad he will be given finishing touches by some of the greatest scholars of his time. And then also, he takes the spiritual path. And he has many sheikhs there. They discipline him very, very severely in many cases. His principal sheikh is called Ad-Dabbas. And Ad-Dabbas is actually from Damascus. And what's he doing in Baghdad? He's in Baghdad because of the fact that Damascus, he's a refugee, from the Crusades. And Ad-Dabbas is a great master. And he will be the principal Sufi sheikh of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. And he always mistreats him. When Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani will come to the Zawiyah, he'll say, "Why do you come back? You're a faqih. Go with the fuqaha. You'll benefit the people." He would always say that. "You're a faqih." He's like, "Why are you coming here?" Over and over again he does that. Sometimes he even push Sheikh Abdul Qadir so that he trips and falls on the ground. That's not very polite. And Sheikh Abdul Qadir he says, "I just want salamat dini." He said, "Why do you come here?" He said, "I want, the soundness of my religion." And he said, "You're a faqih, you'll benefit the people, go to the fuqaha." And this then reaches a climax. This is a cold winter day in December or in January, and he's going with Ad-Dabbas and with the murids to a certain mosque across the Tigris, and they're going to pray Jumu'ah. And they're walking, it's really cold, and they come to what is called Jisrul Yahud, the Jews' bridge. And Sheikh Ad-Dabbas, Abdul Qadir is at the rear. He's walking behind the others, and Sheikh Ad-Dabbas turns around, walks right to him, and throws him in the river. And Sheikh Abdul Qadir had all of his books and his notebooks and everything wrapped up in his sleeve. That's often what they would do. So he falls in the river and he goes like this. He's like, these books can't get wet. And then he's able to get out of the river and he's freezing to death. And in fact, he said, "Okay, so this will be my ghusl." And, he says, "Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim," so that it'll be a ghusl. In Maliki school, you don't have to say that, but this will make it a ghusl for him. And then he has to get out. He has to politely take off his wool outer garment with the books, make sure the books are safe, wring out his other clothes, and then try to go to the mosque where they're going to go. He's not going to be able to catch up with them as he's free. And he said the cold really bothered me. He said, "I was really cold that day. It was really cold." And so then he comes to the place where Sheikh Ad-Dabbas is, and he walks in. And they're starving, by the way. I could tell you more stories. We don't have a whole lot of time, I don't think. I have another engagement after this. But when he comes in, Dabbas says, "We got some really good food today, and we ate it all. We didn't save any for you." And Sheikh Abdul Qadir doesn't say anything. And then the murids say, "Okay, guys, don't you get it?" And so then they begin to attack Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. And they begin to tell him that, "You're a faqih, you don't get it. Don't you hear what the Sheikh is saying?" And then Ad-Dabbas becomes like a lion. And he roars. And he tells the murids, "Get away from him. We're going to say a word to him. I tested him. You don't test him. I tested him to see who he is. And I discovered that he is a mountain, and none of you are his equal. You're not even worthy of kissing his feet. And then after that, the relationship with the Abbas will be that of a loving sheikh. But it's like Sheikh Abdul Qadir is going to be given a huge commission, and he cannot receive that until he is tested. A test that one like me would never have passed. And Sheikh Abdul Qadir then will continue to study, and then by the time that he is in his late 50s, the command comes, Abbas is still alive. He will die a few years after the appearance of Sheikh Abdul Qadir, that you must now preach. You must now appear. And Sheikh Abdul Qadir says, how can I? I am an Ajami. I'm a Persian. And this is a city of the most eloquent of Arabs. And they said, no, you can speak. And he actually is very eloquent, Sheikh Abdul Qadir. But they said, no, no one can do this but you. And then he appears, and of course there's a lot to talk about there. It's one of the great mercies of Islam. I talked about Imam al-Ghazali, and I didn't do him justice. Imam al-Ghazali, of course, during this time when Sheikh Abdul Qadir is still training, will return to Baghdad. And he will come to speak at the Nizamiya again, and the people are so glad to see him again. And he will come back to speak, and he will say something to the effect of Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Qala Allah, and the people just start to wail. He can't even finish his sentence. He couldn't make a sentence when he left, and now the people cannot support a single sentence. They begin to wail that, who is this man now? That this man is incredible. And that he truly is. And then Imam al-Ghazali will present Ihya Ulumuddin, one of the greatest books in all human history, which we don't have time to talk about, but you have Sheikh Faraz, a book that is so polite. It is not Sufism. Ihya Ulumuddin is not a book of Sufism. It is a book for the whole ummah, to make us sincere, to make us good, so that we can be true Muslims, practicing the law the way we should, being polite to each other, speaking correctly, watching our hearts. That's not Sufism. That is one of the prerequisites for Sufism. And all through the book he will say, this is not a book of Mukashafa. He could have given you that. But he's also a faqih, like Sheikh Abdul Qadir. That this, it's not good to give the people the things they can't understand. Many of us, not everyone can follow the Sufi path. Because many people have fundamental disqualifications. And what is that? Because if you take the path of ihsan, you have to go to war. And that's jihad. And who is it that you will be fighting? Well, you might do a jihad outwardly against the Crusaders, but you've got to do a harder jihad than that, and that's the nafs. And that's not difficult. And if you don't know that, then you've never even dreamt of it. And then Satan, to silence the heart, to close down those doors of Satan and of the ego. And when you do that, they declare war on you. And most people say, truce, white flag, just let me pray, okay? Just let me pray, and I'll go to the mosque. I'm not going to constrain you this way. So that's disqualification. Because once you declare war against Satan and the ego, you better be ready to fight. And if you give up, you will be devastated. You can't make truce then. And there are only very few people who can carry that through, like Rabi al-Adawiyya, for example, or Al-Junayd al-Baghdadi, or Abu Yazid al-Bistami, and we could name thousands of others. But these are people, Mawlaya al-Arabi al-Darqawi. Can you find a more beautiful saint, especially in the modern times, and yet the tribulations he's suffered are, so many. Rejection by his family, rejection by his own murids. Some of them, they get the fet and they say, this is all from me, it's not from you, I don't need you anymore. And he would say, that's just the nafs, you will lose everything you got. And they lose it. And they never come back, and they don't speak good of him. Okay, so these are people who are tested. Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani said, لا تهرب من البلاء فإن البلاء مع الصبر أساس كل خير أساس النبوة والرسالة والمعرفة والمحبة. Do not flee from affliction. And he didn't, did he? He didn't. Because affliction with patience, is the foundation of all good. The foundation of prophecy. What prophet is not tested? Of messengerhood, they're tested even more. Of ma'rifah, which for those of us who are regular human beings is about as high as we can go. But you don't get there for free. And you don't get there by reading books or just reading books. And mahabba, love, the love of God, which is even higher, and you don't get there easily. God's dowry is immense, and you've got to pay it. And what is it? My soul. I give you my soul, dead. Green death, white death, black death, red death. Dead to my ego, dead to physical harm, dead to, people slandering you, speaking ill of you, and so forth. So, Imam al-Ghazali has done that. And now he is able to revive not only the religion, but also others. And he did that by reviving himself. And he will teach his teaching, and basically Shaykh Abdul Qadir will be the one who applies that teaching. So you can say that Imam al-Ghazali, he lays down the path, and Shaykh Abdul Qadir applies it. But Shaykh Abdul Qadir would do it over a much longer time. He's younger, he will begin later, and he will also be given a much longer life. Imam al-Ghazali died young. Allah yarhamuhu wa radiyallahu anhu. So we're trying to finish up this story, but the main thing I want you to keep your eyes on here, and you probably got it, is the fact that these revivers cannot do anything until they revive themselves. And not only that, but they've got to get everything together. They're not amateurs. They are people. Shaykh Abdul Qadir will be called Shaykh al-Islam. No one will question that. No one. That he is the Shaykh of the time in law, in hadith, in other forms of outward knowledge. And he teaches like 13 classes a day. And he doesn't sleep at night. That's when he does his things. And, that's when he has other work to do then. But when Shaykh Abdul Qadir appears, then the great struggles of Imam al-Ghazali and of Shaykh Abdul Qadir himself and many other great people, it's like now God is about to answer your prayer. And so Shaykh Abdul Qadir appears. He begins just to preach, but the people love him. And the people flock to him, and he has to go out of the Zawiyah and preach at the city wall next to the Zawiyah. And then they have to build a mimbar. And then they have thousands of people filling the place. And the people are writing down notes as he speaks, and they say that, he would speak, and they used to have musammi', who will be a person who hears what you say, and then says it again, and then someone else hears it, and they say they didn't do that. Because people sitting way in the back could also hear him speak. And he's not raising his voice. He has a beautiful voice. but they can hear him. And again, also, nobody makes a sound. No, and the city does tawbah. Jews will come from far away who have heard voices saying, go to Baghdad, take the Shahada from Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. Christians, the same thing. They would say, we were sent to Baghdad to take the Shahada from you. And so, and his Zawiyah, it's always there's someone at the door. Does anyone need food? Does anyone need clothing? Does anyone need a place to spend the night? And if you do, they will take care of you. And he takes in the whole ummah. He takes in the refugees. And they weren't Palestinian refugees. They were Syrian refugees, Lebanese refugees. They were refugees from Palestine and from what is today Jordan and every way. And he takes care of them. And he also trains them so that they will be fighters. They will be mujahideen. But they will also be really good people, sweet people, lions on the battlefield, following the commander. And who would that commander be? Salah ad-Din. Salah ad-Din. So when Shaykh Abdul Qadir appears, then there is Imaduddin Zengi. He appears at the same time. And Shirku, who is the uncle of Salah ad-Din. And they love Shaykh Abdul Qadir. Imaduddin will be assassinated shortly after that by the assassins. This is also the time of the assassins, the Hashishiyin, and the old man in the mountain. It's a difficult time. And then, after the death, martyrdom of Imaduddin, comes Nuruddin Zengi. What a man. What a lion. These are under the discipline of Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. And many others as well. And Salah ad-Din is actually just a boy. And he will be a teenager. And Shaykh Abdul Qadir will even tell him, that you will conquer Egypt. You have to conquer Egypt. There's no way to fight the Crusaders if we don't consolidate ourselves, and we can't have Fatimid Egypt. Fatimid Egypt, they stab you in the back every time. You've got to conquer Egypt. You will fail the first time. You will succeed the second. And then the mujahids who will fight with Nuruddin and his army, a lot of them are going to be followers of Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. And this is one of the great periods of our history. One of the truly great periods of our history. Salah ad-Din, we know him today for his immense chivalry. Well, that's what they are teaching, futuwa. And Suhrawardi is doing the same thing. And he has Kitab al-Futuwa. But this is a basic part of Islam. But you have Kitab al-Futuwa, and they apply that. That you're a Sufi, then you are a feta. You have Futuwa. You give everything, for the ummah. And this is also the beginning of what we will call the Great Revival. And Orientalists will call it the Great Sunni Revival. And Shaykh Abdul Qadir is essential in that. And he reforms the ulama. In fact, I don't want to talk about his karamat. And in Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he says, be very careful. Sunnis, we believe in karamat. You have to. But you don't have to believe in every single report you hear about karamat. Some of them may not be authentic. And, they need to be authentic. You have to make sure that who told you this? How did you get this? Because people do make up stories. And, but Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he said, be very careful not to deny the karamat of Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani because of the fact that so many of them were mutawatir. They were seen by thousands, and therefore they definitely happened. Maybe I'll tell you 2 or 3. But for example, when he appears, he does have karamat. He doesn't like them. The awliya don't like karamat. You might find this strange, but they are ashamed of their karamat. And this tells you a lot about who they are. Very humble people. Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani said, whoever thinks he has weight, has no weight at all. Whoever thinks he has a station has no station at all. Okay, if you want the path, that's the way it's got to be. You know, one of the worst sins that arouses the anger of God is that you frown at your brother or your sister. But much worse than that is that you see yourself. I am something. You know, you did all this work, you studied all these books, you got these teachings, and you've got fatah, you've got futuhat. You are somebody. That's shaitan whispering to you. And then you say, I am somebody, then I'm sorry, you're nobody. You're nobody. And to see your actions, look at what we did. I mean, look at this beautiful place. I know that you don't say, look what we did. Inshallah, you do 1,000 times bigger and better and more beautiful. Okay, but that's because you don't see it. Because if you see it, and that we mean by that you begin to say, look at us. Look what we have done. No, this is the work of God. God gave you this. And He gave you this man. And He gave you his wife. And He gave you your other teachers. And what do we have? I didn't create myself. You know, God formed me and this man and all of us in our mother's wombs when we had done nothing. So what did you deserve? What did I deserve? To have the ability to speak or to see or to learn something or to teach? Nothing. It's nothing but a gift. So you see it as a gift of God. And you don't see it as your special contribution to history or anything else. So, you know, this is the way that he was. He doesn't like his karamat because maybe I see them. You know, it's embarrassing. But God gave him powerful karamat because you've got to wake up this generation of children, of idiots. And I could tell you a lot of the karamats, but I'm not going to do that. Although I'm being tempted. But I'm not going to do it. But, you know, so he appears, and the Caliph...
We could strike a deal, which is we've been trying to bring you to Toronto for a while. You could come and teach about Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani because we want to hear it in depth.
Okay, but in any case, do we still have a few minutes?
Yes.
Okay, so in any case, the Caliph is very worried about Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani because he has too big of a following and he has miracles. And the Caliph is really a Caliph just in name. He's an Abbasi. But, you know, he's like, you could say either the mayor of Baghdad or the godfather of the mafia. Both of those are sort of going to fit. And so the Abbasid Caliph comes to visit Sheikh Abdul Qadir. Now, as you know, he's going to have a lot of people with him. He's from the court. He doesn't come alone. And so he says, show me something. Show me something. And Sheikh Abdul Qadir says, what? It's wintertime. He says, tufaha. Give me an apple. Give me an apple. It's wintertime. And so Sheikh Abdul Qadir puts his hand in the air. This was seen by hundreds of people. And he brings down out of the air 2 apples. Fresh apples. And he takes his and pops it open. And they say the fragrance of it, of its freshness, filled the room. And the Caliph then takes his apple and pops it open. And there's a worm in it. And he says, Ma balu duda. What's the deal about the worm? And Sheikh Abdul Qadir, he said, that apple of yours was touched by the hand of a tyrant. And so the Caliph says, this is serious. And he leaves. And a little bit later, sometime later, maybe a few weeks, I don't know, he comes back. This time he comes back with all kinds of people. And he comes back with men bearing sacks of gold. Because he is wealthy. People give him gifts. He is a caliph. The Seljuks give him gifts. They rule, but, you know, he gives him gifts. And so they come to him. He never stands up, by the way. He won't stand up for a prince or for the caliph or anybody else. He'll stand up for you. And he'll stand up for a poor man. His dying words to his great son, Abdul Razak, who was one of his one of his successors, and also most of the Jilanis in the world today, they go back to Abdul Razak. That is the most common lineage. And so he tells Abdul Razak, you only need two things in this world. Suhbatu faqir, the companionship of a poor man. Wa hurmatu wali, and the sanctity of a wali. Maybe he means by that you respect the sanctity of a wali. And then he dies. Okay, so he loves the poor. And he treats the poor like kings. And he sits and talks with them. That's the way he was. That's the way the Prophet was, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But now, the Caliph comes back, and I don't remember his name. I don't remember his kunya. There were 5 caliphs during the time of Sheikh Abdul Qadir. And he said, Abu Fulan, Abu so-and-so, I have no need of this. I have no need of this. And he said, no, we know your status. We honor you. This is a gift to you. And so he takes one sack. This was seen by thousands. And he takes in the right hand, one in the left, and he squeezes them. And red blood comes out. And it flows in the direction of the Caliph who's sitting in front of him. And he said, Abu so-and-so, this is a gift? You give me the blood of the Muslims? And the Caliph fainted. And of course all the people come in, they give him salts and they revive him. And when he's revived and he can hear, then Shaykh Abdul Qadir says to him, if you are not of the house of Abbas, Shaykh Abdul Qadir is a Hassani Husseini, big nasab. And as a Husseini, he goes up above Imam Ali al-Rida. But he says, if you are not of Ahlul Bayt, if you are not an Abbasi, I would have this blood follow you all the way back to your palace. And then from that day on, there are not many visits. And Shaykh Abdul Qadir will take a scrap of paper and write to the Caliph, Abdul Qadir commands you to do such and such, and do it. Remove the judge. Do this. And the Caliph, they say he would weep. But he would do it. Of course, the power at that time is in the hands of the Turks. And Turks are great, but, sometimes they were not as religious, thoroughly religious as they ought to be. So one of the Turkish princes would bring wine into Baghdad during Jumu'ah. It doesn't mean that he's not a Muslim, that. It doesn't mean he's not a good mujahid either. They're good fighters, but, and we don't know that Shaykh Abdul Qadir knew about that or that he intended anything. But one day the wagon's coming in, the people at Jummah, Shaykh Abdul Qadir is late to Jummah for whatever reason, and he walks out, and there is the wine wagon coming into the door, because he's at the city gate, right in front of him, and they see him, and they're terrified, and they hit their horses like, go! Let's go, move, And he says, stop. And they don't stop. And he tells the horses, stop, and they stop. And then he says, what do you have in that wagon? And in fact, the drivers get severe stomach pains, and they buckle over, and they just say, have mercy on us. And Shaykh Abdul Qadir does, and the pain goes away. And then, he takes the wine, and he makes a dua, and it turns into vinegar. Again, these things are witnessed by a lot of people. So this is why, they will do what he says, because that's what's needed. And another occasion, the ulama are saying that, who is this upstart from Persia? And who knows more than we do? And so they say that 100 ulama, of the best ulama, put together the most difficult questions that they could imagine. And they said, let's just go teach him a lesson. And so they come into his zawiyah, he's sitting on his chair, they don't say anything, he doesn't say anything, and they say, immediately we forgot everything we ever knew. And they come in, like peasants, and they sit down, and they can't even speak. And then Shaykh Abdul Qadir goes through all the 100 questions. Of course, they don't have a piece of paper, but they say he answered every question that we had brought. And then by the grace of God, God gives them back what was taken away. And then, you are the Sultan. And that's why they know that, that is the question that I wrote, and he answered it. So this is an amazing gift from God that restored the Ummah. There's another story. This is a karama that you don't have to believe if you don't want to. It's reported by Shaykh Abdul Qadir about himself, but he did tell it to many people. And he says that once in his days when he was going through training, because he would wander in the ruins around Baghdad, and he would fast for long days, and mashallah. But they say once he found a man who was about to die, and the man had been attacked by robbers. And so he said, he took care of him, he brought him back, he gave him the first aid he needed and so forth, he nursed him back. And he said the man was Islam. Again, you don't have to believe that if you don't want to. But this is what he will do. He will bring it back to life. He will bring the Sufis also under his control. Because Sufis also have to be disciplined. They've got to follow the Kitab and the Sunnah. They've got to do what they're supposed to do. فَاسْلُكْ طَرِيقَهُمْ إِن كُنْتَ تَابِعَهُمْ. So follow their path, if you really are their follower. In other words, be like them. So he becomes their sheikh. This is the beginning of what we'll call the Sufi order. Under him, there's also Suhrawardi order that appears at roughly the same time in the same city, and they're friends, they love each other. They do different missions. Even in India, if you look at India, that would include Pakistan and Bangladesh, Greater India, you have 4 main paths there, which are Suhrawardi, Chishti, Naqshbandi, and Qadiri. And there are others, of course, but these are the 4 big paths of India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. And, if you talk about the tariqas that will affect politics, the political world, and try to reform it, that will be mostly the Naqshbandis. They will come in here number 1, and the Qadiris will come number 2. Number 2, the Chishtis are beautiful, and so are the Suhrawardis, but they don't do that kind of thing. The Chishtis work a lot among the common people, the peasants, because they all have different missions. But, he creates this great good. His path spreads all over the world, and, it's part of the restoration of this religion, to what it should be. And we ask God, in this time, to make us worthy to do something that is inspired by this. But we've got to know that if we don't transform ourselves, if we do not get sound knowledge, if we do not discipline ourselves, why should we have much expectation of success? And so we ask God to enable us in our own little ways, in my own little way, and yours, that we can also get ourselves right, purify ourselves, transform ourselves, and then help this ummah, which is also like that man who the robbers had attacked. Maybe his name was Islam. Many people, Muslims, have the name Islam. But Islam today is like that. It is beaten up. It has so many false representatives. And it's like, what are we going to do about that? And inshallah, you continue to do the wonderful work that you're doing. I hope that I will be able to come back soon. I love Sheikh Faraz. I believe in Sheikh Faraz, and I believe in his wonderful, I can't say this, I did already, wife. Okay, she's going to say, why do you do this? I'm sorry, forgive me. But it's the truth. And all of you, inshallah, and may we see something really beautiful come about in Canada, in the United States, in the Caribbean, in South America. You know that a few Muslims went to the southern Mexico And they did some da'wah there, and 1,000 Mayans embraced Islam. 1,000. And then, of course, they're not treated very well by our own Muslims. And then the different groups come in, and so they try to divide them. And most of the Mayans said, I'm sorry, but we don't want this. We'll just go back home. 900 of them. I won't say they left Islam, but they just said, no, this is not for us. We don't want to be enemies of each other. We don't want to be cursing each other. They're beautiful people. And all they will say is, just visit us. They just want to be your host. They're very simple, beautiful people. Now there's about 100, 120 of them who still are holding to the religion. And we have a good imam, Mudar, and we have a wonderful sister named Zainab, who are giving a lot of attention to them. And they need more. But, this is an amazing thing. I mean, but who's going to take care of these people? Who's going to take care of these people? And may we find ways to do that. اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضى وجعلنا من عبيدك السعداء وأمتنا على كلمة الهدى علمنا ما ينفعنا ووفقنا للعمل بما علمتنا به واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم يا رب العالمين اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. Please keep me in your prayers. And I pray that Sheikh Faraz is given absolutely perfect health and a long life, and that God blesses his spine, and God blesses every part of his blessed body, and that God gives him long health, long life, and perfect health. And these are the men to be served. And inshallah, we will see beautiful things. Of course, Gandhi said many incredible things. Gandhi had a lot of big Muslim friends, as you probably know, like Kalam Azad, for example. They did ask Gandhi, what do you think about Western civilization? What did he say? I think it would be a good idea. But he also said, you be the change you want to see. And that is priceless. Wassalamu alaikum.